The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining colony of New Haven when the first emergency signal crackled through the communication system. Jake Collins had been drinking his third cup of coffee in the command center when the alarm pierced the quiet morning air. He was the commander of the Colonial Defense Force, a job that usually meant dealing with equipment failures and minor disputes between miners. This morning was different. "Commander Collins, we have multiple distress calls coming from Sector 7, said Bobby Martinez, the young communications officer. His voice shook as he read the incoming messages. 3 Kethver military squads are requesting immediate evacuation. They're saying something attacked them. Jake set down his coffee cup and walked to the main display screen. The Kethver were 8-foot-tall aliens with thick, armor-like skin and claws that could cut through steel. They were warriors by nature, bred for combat across generations. If something had attacked them badly enough to call for help, it was serious. "What kind of attack?" Jake asked. "Pirates? Another alien species?" Bobby's face went pale as he listened to more reports through his headset. "Sir, they're not being very clear. They keep using a word that doesn't translate well. Something about a warbeast." Dr. Linda Martinez entered the command center at that moment. She was the colony's expert on alien life forms and had been studying the Kethver for 3 years. Linda was a small woman with gray hair who always carried a tablet full of research notes. "Did someone say warbeast?" she asked, overhearing the conversation. "You know what that means?" Jake turned to her with relief. Linda always had answers. "It's an old Kethver term," Linda said, pulling up files on her tablet. "They used to talk about creatures like this in their ancient legends. Monsters that were used in wars thousands of years ago. But those are just stories." The communication system crackled again. This time, the voice speaking was deeper and more controlled. It was War Leader Thekvel, the commanding officer of all Kethver forces in this sector. "Human colony of New Haven," the alien voice said through the translator. "We must speak with your leaders immediately. A situation has developed that concerns both our peoples." Jake looked at Linda, then at Bobby. In 3 years of mining operations, the Kethver had never requested a direct conversation with human leadership. They preferred to handle everything through formal diplomatic channels that took weeks to arrange. "Patch him through to the main screen," Jake ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the imposing figure of War Leader Thekvel. His chitinous armor was scarred from many battles, and his forearms ended in claws that could tear through metal. Despite his fearsome appearance, Jake could see something in the alien's eyes that he had never seen before: fear. "Commander Collins," Thekvel said, "we have deployed a weapon near your colony. This weapon cannot be easily controlled once it is released. We offer you one opportunity to avoid unnecessary destruction." "What kind of weapon?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "Your people call them myths and legends," Thekvel replied. "We call them necessary tools for war. You have 48 hours to surrender your mining rights to this world and evacuate your colony. If you refuse, we will release the warbeast." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in silence. Linda was already typing frantically on her tablet. "Jake, I need to access all our files on Kethver history and biology. If they're talking about what I think they're talking about, we're in serious trouble." "How serious?" Jake asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. "The kind of serious where conventional weapons don't work," Linda said without looking up from her research across the colony. Life continued normally for most of the 3,000 human residents. Children played in the recreation centers, while their parents worked in the mines or maintained the equipment that kept the colony running. Most people had no idea that their peaceful lives were about to change forever. In the residential sector, 10-year-old Amy Foster was feeding the colony's stray cats behind the cafeteria building. Amy had always been good with animals. Even the most aggressive creatures seemed to calm down when she was around. Her father, Pete Foster, often joked that she could probably make friends with a wild bear if she tried. Pete was one of the colony's chief engineers, responsible for maintaining the power systems that kept New Haven running. He was a practical, man who believed in solving problems with hard work and common sense. He had raised Amy alone since her mother died in a transport accident 5 years earlier. "Amy, time for lunch," Pete called from the cafeteria entrance. "Just a minute, Dad," Amy replied, scratching behind the ears of an orange cat that had been abandoned by the previous mining crew. "Rusty is still hungry." Pete smiled and waited. He had learned long ago that rushing Amy when she was caring for animals was pointless. She would finish when she was satisfied that they were properly fed and comfortable. As Amy gave the last of her sandwich to the cats, an emergency announcement echoed across the colony's public address system. "All residents report to your designated shelter areas immediately. This is not a drill. All residents report to shelter areas immediately." Pete's expression changed from patient amusement to concern. Emergency drills were scheduled weeks in advance, and today wasn't supposed to have one. "Come on, Amy," he said, taking her hand. "We need to get to the shelter." As they walked quickly through the corridors toward the residential shelter area, they passed other families doing the same thing. Parents carried small children while older kids asked questions that no one could answer. "What's happening, Dad?" Amy asked, having to hurry to keep up with her father's longer steps. "I don't know yet," Pete admitted, "but we'll find out soon." In the command center, Jake was receiving reports from the perimeter sensors. Something large was moving in the forest beyond the colony's outer defenses. The readings were unlike anything in their databases. "It's big," reported Sergeant Danny Brooks, the leader of the colony's security team. "Sensors show something roughly the size of a small building, but it's moving like a living creature." "How is that possible?" Jake asked. Danny shook his head. "Unknown, sir. But it's headed this way, and it's not trying to hide." Dr. Martinez looked up from her research with a grim expression. "Jake, I've been reading through every file we have on Kethver legends and mythology. The descriptions are consistent across hundreds of sources. Warbeasts were creatures that the ancient Kethver somehow controlled and used as living weapons." "But those are just stories," Jake said, hoping he was right. "The stories say these creatures were nearly indestructible," Linda continued. "They were immune to most weapons and driven by an intelligence that made them extremely dangerous. According to legend, they were so powerful that even the Kethver eventually stopped using them because they couldn't be properly controlled. And now they've decided to use one against us," Jake said grimly. "It gets worse," Linda added. "The legends also say that these creatures were tortured and modified until they became filled with rage and pain. They weren't just weapons. They were victims that had been turned into monsters." The perimeter alarms began sounding as the creature reached the edge of the colony's detection grid. On the main screen, they could see a dark shape moving between the trees. It was massive and moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. "All security teams to defensive positions," Jake ordered through the communication system. "Prepare for possible hostile contact." As the security teams took their positions along the colony's outer walls, Jake looked at the peaceful residential areas where families were gathering in shelter areas. Children like Amy Foster were probably scared and confused, not understanding why their safe world was suddenly filled with alarms and emergency procedures. Jake had been a soldier before becoming a colonial administrator. He had fought in conflicts across 3-star systems and had seen weapons that could destroy entire cities. But he had never faced anything like this. He was about to discover that some legends were more real than anyone wanted to believe. The Warbeast was coming, and nobody knew how to stop it. The ground shook beneath the colony as something massive crashed through the outer forest. Jake Collins stood in the command center watching the sensor readings climb higher and higher. Whatever was approaching was larger than their biggest mining equipment and moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. "Distance to target?" Jake asked Danny Brooks, who was coordinating the defensive response from his position on the outer wall. 2 kilometers and closing," Danny's voice crackled through the communication system. "Still can't get a clear visual through the trees, but the motion sensors are going crazy." Dr. Linda Martinez sat at her workstation surrounded by screens showing alien biology data and ancient Kethver texts. She had been working for 6 hours straight, trying to understand what they were facing. "Jake, I think I know why the Kethver are afraid of this thing," she said without looking up from her research. According to these old records, warbeasts weren't just trained animals. They were intelligent creatures that were captured and tortured until their minds broke. Then the Kethver used technology to control what was left. "You're saying this thing was once a normal animal?" Jake asked. "Not normal by our standards," Linda replied. These creatures were already dangerous predators, but they had families, social structures, maybe even culture. The Kethver took all that away and turned them into weapons. The first visual contact came when the creature emerged from the tree line. Danny Brooks had seen many frightening things during his military service, but nothing had prepared him for what stepped into the clearing near the colony's main gate. The warbeast stood, nearly 30 feet tall on 6 powerful legs that ended in claws the size of swords. Its body was covered in thick, scarred hide that looked like it had been burned and healed many times. Multiple eyes of different sizes covered its massive head, each one moving independently to scan the area. Long tentacle-like appendages writhed from its shoulders, each one tipped with what looked like metal spikes. "Dear God," Danny whispered into his communicator. "Command, you need to see this." The image appeared on the main screen in the command center. Several people gasped when they saw the creature. It was clearly alive and intelligent, but everything about it seemed wrong. Patches of its hide glowed with an unnatural blue light, and metal devices were embedded throughout its body like some kind of horrible surgery. "The control implants," Linda said, pointing at the glowing sections. "Those devices are connected to its nervous system. They're probably causing constant pain." The warbeast stopped about 500 meters from the outer wall and stood perfectly still. Its many eyes focused on the human defensive positions with an intelligence that made everyone uncomfortable. It wasn't acting like a wild animal, it was studying them. "All teams, weapons ready," Jake ordered. "But do not fire unless it attacks first." Danny positioned his 20-man security team along the wall with their plasma rifles and explosive charges. These were experienced soldiers who had fought off pirate raids and hostile wildlife. They were good at their jobs and well-equipped with the latest military technology. None of that mattered. The warbeast moved faster than something its size should have been able to move. One moment it was standing still, and the next it was charging directly at the main gate. Danny's team opened fire with everything they had. The plasma bolts struck the creature's hide and simply disappeared. The explosive charges detonated against its body without leaving so much as a scratch. Energy weapons that could melt through steel had no effect at all. "Target the legs!" Danny shouted. "Bring it down?" His men concentrated their fire on the creature's limbs, but the result was the same. The warbeast didn't even slow down. It crashed through the outer wall like it was made of paper, scattering concrete blocks and twisted metal in all directions. But instead of continuing its charge into the colony, the creature stopped again. It turned its multiple eyes toward the power station on the east side of the settlement. "It's not attacking randomly," Linda observed from the command center. "It's targeting our infrastructure." The warbeast moved toward the power station with deliberate purpose. Its tentacle appendages lashed out and wrapped around the main generator building. With a grinding sound of metal and concrete, it ripped the entire structure from its foundation and crushed it. The lights went out across half the colony. "Emergency power activated," reported Bobby Martinez from his communication station. "But we've lost primary power to sectors 3 through 7. The creature moved to its next target, the communication array that connected New Haven to other human colonies. Again, it destroyed the installation with surgical precision, leaving the colony isolated from outside help. Danny regrouped his remaining men near the central plaza. Half of his team had been injured when the wall collapsed, but the creature hadn't directly attacked any of them. It seemed focused only on destroying the colony's ability to function. "This thing knows exactly what it's doing," Danny reported. To Jake, "It's not just a monster. It's following some kind of plan." Pete Foster was in the residential shelter with Amy and about 200 other colonists. The emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls, and the sound of destruction from outside made everyone nervous. "Dad, what's happening?" Amy asked. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, having convinced several other children to sit quietly around her. "There's a dangerous animal outside," Pete explained, not wanting to frighten her more than necessary. "The security team is handling it." Amy tilted her head, listening to the sounds from outside. Unlike the other children, she didn't seem scared. She seemed curious. "It doesn't sound like an animal," she said. "Animals don't break things on purpose. Like that. They only break things when they're scared or hurt." Pete looked at his daughter with surprise. Even as a child, Amy had always been unusually good at understanding animal behavior. Her observations about the family pets were often more accurate than what the veterinarian said. "What do you mean?" Pete asked. "Listen," Amy said, holding up one small hand. "It's not roaring or making angry sounds. If it was a hunting animal, it would be making noise to scare us. If it was a territorial animal, it would be marking its space. This one is just ... working." Outside, the warbeast had moved to the water processing plant. Again, it destroyed the facility with careful precision, cutting off the colony's fresh water supply. Then it turned toward the landing pad where the emergency evacuation shuttles were stored. "It's going to trap us here," Jake realized, watching the creature's methodical destruction. First power, then communications, then water, and now it's going for our escape route. Dr. Martinez had been monitoring the creature's behavior through the remaining sensors. Her readings showed something disturbing. "Jake, look at these bioscans," she said, bringing up data on her screen. "The creature's stress levels are through the roof. Its heart rate, brain activity, and body temperature are all indicating extreme distress. You're saying it's in pain?" "Not just pain," Linda replied. "According to these readings, this creature is in agony. Those control implants aren't just controlling its behavior. They're torturing it." The warbeast reached the landing pad and began systematically destroying the evacuation shuttles. Each ship was crushed or torn apart with the same careful efficiency it had shown with the other installations from their position on the wall. Danny and his remaining men watched helplessly. Their weapons were useless, and the creature was too intelligent to be tricked or distracted. "Command, what are your orders?" Danny asked through his communicator. Jake stared at the main screen, watching the creature complete its destruction of their escape route. In less than 2 hours, the warbeast had effectively trapped 3,000 people in a colony that could no longer function properly. "Fall back to defensive positions around the residential areas," Jake ordered. "Protect the civilians." As night began to fall, the warbeast finished its systematic destruction of the colony's key systems. Then it did something that chilled everyone who witnessed it. The creature walked to the main gate, turned to face the colony, and sat down. It wasn't leaving. It wasn't continuing to attack. It was settling in to wait, like a guard dog watching over a yard full of prey. "It's intelligent," Linda whispered, staring at the image of the massive creature silhouetted against the darkening sky. "This isn't just a weapon. This is a thinking being that's been turned into something horrible." The warbeast's multiple eyes glowed in the darkness, never stopping their careful watch over the trapped colony. Whatever the Kethver had done to create this creature, they had made something that was far more dangerous than a simple monster. They had made a tortured genius. And now it held the lives of 3,000 humans in its claws. Jake looked around the command center at his exhausted staff. Tomorrow they would have to find a way to deal with a creature that their best weapons couldn't even scratch. A creature that was smart enough to trap them and patient enough to wait. For the first time since the crisis began, Jake wondered if they would all die on this distant world. Victims of a war between species that most humans had never even heard of. Outside, the warbeast continued its silent vigil, and the long night began. The first night under the warbeast's watch passed slowly for everyone in New Haven Colony. Jake Collins had not slept at all. He spent the dark hours in the command center, staring at the sensor readings that showed the massive creature still sitting by the main gate like a giant, deadly sentinel. Dr. Linda Martinez had also stayed awake, reviewing every piece of data they had collected about the Warbeast. Her research was painting a picture that made her feel sick to her stomach. "Jake, come look at this," she said, as morning light began to filter through the command center windows. Jake walked over to her workstation, where multiple screens showed brain scan data and biological readings from the creature. "I've been analyzing the creature's neural patterns all night," Linda explained. "The readings are inconsistent, but when I filter out the interference from those control implants, something interesting appears." She brought up a cleaned version of the brain scan data. "Look at these patterns. They're similar to what we see in highly intelligent social animals on Earth: dolphins, elephants, some of the great apes." "You're saying this thing was once as smart as a dolphin?" Jake asked. "Maybe smarter," Linda replied. "But that's not the disturbing part. Look at these other readings." She switched to a different screen that showed the creature's stress and pain indicators. The levels were so high they seemed impossible for any living thing to endure. "Those control implants are not just controlling its behavior," Linda continued. "They're causing constant, severe pain. This creature has been tortured every moment since those devices were implanted. No wonder it destroys everything it encounters." Meanwhile, in the residential shelter, Amy Foster was wide awake despite the early hour. She had been listening to the sounds from outside all night. Unlike the adults, who heard only silence and felt growing fear, Amy heard something different. Every few minutes, a low sound would drift across the colony. It was too quiet for most people to notice, but Amy had always been good at hearing things others missed. The sound reminded her of something. "Dad," she whispered to Pete, who was dozing in a chair nearby. "Do you hear that?" Pete opened his eyes and listened carefully. "I don't hear anything, sweetheart." "That low sound," Amy insisted. "It comes every few minutes." Pete listened harder but still heard nothing. "Maybe it's just the wind." Amy shook her head. "It sounds like Rusty, the orange cat." Pete asked, confused. "When Rusty first came to the colony, he was hurt and scared," Amy explained. "He made sounds like that when he was in pain but trying not to show it. He was asking for help, but he was too proud to beg." Pete looked at his 10-year-old daughter with concern. "Amy, that thing outside isn't a cat. It's extremely dangerous." "I know it's not a cat," Amy said patiently. "But pain sounds the same no matter what kind of animal makes it." As the morning progressed, Jake received reports from the perimeter guards. The Warbeast had not moved from its position by the gate, but it continued to watch everything that happened in the colony. Its multiple eyes tracked any movement, and its tentacle appendages twitched whenever someone approached too close to the outer areas. "It's like it's waiting for something," reported Danny Brooks from his observation post on the residential building roof. "But I can't figure out what." Dr. Martinez emerged from the command center and approached the area where Pete Foster was working with the engineering team. They were trying to restore partial power using backup generators and rerouted cables. "Pete, I need to ask you something about Amy," Linda said. Pete looked up from the power coupling he was installing. "What about her?" "I've heard she has an unusual ability with animals," Linda continued. "How unusual?" "She's always been good with pets and wildlife," Pete replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, the answer is absolutely not." "I'm not suggesting anything dangerous," Linda assured him. "I just want to understand her abilities better. Has she ever calmed down an aggressive animal?" Pete was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There was an incident last year. A wild predator from the local ecosystem got into the colony. It was about the size of a large dog, with claws and teeth that could tear a person apart. The security team was preparing to shoot it when Amy walked up to it." "What happened?" "She sat down about 10 feet away from it and started talking," Pete said. "Not baby talk or commands. Just normal conversation like she was talking to a friend. The animal stopped growling and lay down. Within an hour, it was calm enough for us to safely escort it back to the forest." Linda felt her heart racing. "Pete, that creature was a Veltar hunter. They're one of the most aggressive predators on this planet." Our behavioral specialist said it was impossible to calm one down without sedatives. Amy did it with words and patience, Pete said simply. In the shelter area, Amy had grown tired of sitting still, despite her father's instructions to stay. Inside, she had moved to a window where she could see across the colony toward the main gate. The Warbeast was clearly visible in the distance, a massive dark shape against the morning sky. As she watched, Amy noticed something that the trained soldiers and scientists had missed. The creature wasn't just sitting motionless, it was moving in a pattern. Every few minutes, it would shift its weight from one side to the other, then back again. Its head would turn left, then right, then return to center. "It's pacing," Amy whispered to herself, just like Rusty did when he was trapped in the storage room. The pattern was exactly what she had seen in caged animals that were stressed and looking for a way out. The Warbeast wasn't guarding the colony like a predator watching prey. It was pacing like a prisoner trying to find escape. Amy thought about what her father had told her about the situation. The adults believed the creature was holding them hostage, but Amy could see something different. The Warbeast looked just as trapped as the humans did. Late that morning, Jake called a meeting of all department heads to discuss evacuation options. The meeting was held in the main conference room, with Pete attending as the chief engineer. "We have 3 possible plans," Jake explained to the group. "First, we try to distract the creature while civilians escape through the back entrance. Second, we attempt to negotiate with the Kethver for more time. Third, we wait for rescue ships to arrive." "How long until rescue ships get here?" asked Dr. Martinez. 6 days minimum, Jake replied. "And that's assuming our distress signal got through before the communication array was destroyed." Pete raised his hand. "What about our power situation?" "We can maintain basic life support for about 4 days using the backup generators," Jake answered. "After that, we'll have serious problems." As the adults discussed increasingly desperate plans, Amy made a decision that would have horrified them if they had known about it. She quietly left the shelter area and began making her way toward the outer sections of the colony. Amy had explored every part of New Haven during her 3 years there. She knew which corridors were rarely used and which maintenance tunnels could take her where she wanted to go without being seen by the security patrols. She was small enough to fit through spaces that adults couldn't use, and quiet enough to move without attracting attention. Most importantly, she had a plan that none of the adults would understand. As Amy made her way through the colony's back passages, she thought about all the hurt and frightened animals she had helped over the years. Each one had required patience and understanding. Each one had needed to feel safe before it could trust. The Warbeast was just a bigger version of the same problem. Amy reached a maintenance exit that opened near the colony's outer edge, about halfway between the residential area and the main gate where the creature waited. Through a small window, she could see the massive form of the Warbeast more clearly than ever before. Up close, she could see the metal devices embedded in its hide, glowing with that unnatural blue light. She could see old scars covering its body and fresh wounds where the control implants had been recently adjusted. Most importantly, she could see its eyes. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of something that had been hurt so badly and for so long that it had almost forgotten how to be anything except angry and afraid. Amy took a deep breath and opened the maintenance door. She stepped outside into the open ground, between the colony and the Warbeast, knowing that within seconds every sensor in New Haven would detect her presence. The adults would panic, and her father would be terrified, but Amy had learned something important from working with frightened animals. Sometimes the only way to help them was to show them that you weren't afraid, even when you probably should be. The Warbeast immediately noticed her. All of its eyes turned toward the small figure walking calmly across the open space, its massive head tilted to one side in what looked like confusion. Amy walked until she was about 50 feet from the creature, then did something that no military strategist or behavioral scientist would have recommended. She sat down cross-legged on the ground, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. The Warbeast stared down at her with all of its multiple eyes, clearly. trying to understand what this small creature was doing. For the first time since its arrival, the massive beast stopped its constant pacing and became completely still. Amy smiled up at the creature and began to speak in the same calm. The moment Amy Foster sat down in front of the Warbeast, every alarm in the colony command center began screaming at once. Motion sensors, heat detectors, and proximity warnings all activated simultaneously as they detected a small human figure in the creature's immediate vicinity. Jake Collins ran to the main display screen and felt his heart stop when he saw what was happening. A child was sitting calmly on the ground while a 30-foot monster loomed over her. "Get me a visual identification?" "On that person," Jake shouted to Bobby Martinez. "Scanning now," Bobby replied, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "Sir, it's Amy Foster, age 10. Daughter of Chief Engineer Pete Foster." Jake grabbed his communicator. "Pete Foster to the command center immediately. Emergency priority." Dr. Linda Martinez was already studying the readings from her sensors. What she saw made no sense according to everything she knew about animal behavior and stress responses. "Jake, look at this," she said, pointing to her screen. "The creature's stress indicators are dropping." "What do you mean dropping?" "Its heart rate is slowing down. Brain activity is shifting from high-stress patterns to something much calmer. This is the first time since it arrived that we've seen any reduction in its agitation levels." Pete Foster burst into the command center, still wearing his work clothes and carrying a wrench. "What's the emergency?" "I was in the middle of repairing the backup power system." Jake pointed to the main screen where Amy could be seen sitting peacefully while the massive Warbeast stared down at her. "Oh no," Pete whispered. "How did she get out there?" "That's what we need to figure out," Jake said. "But right now, we need to get her back safely." "I'll take a team and retrieve her," offered Danny Brooks through the communication system. "No," Dr. Martinez said quickly. "Look at these readings. The creature is calmer than it's been since it arrived. If we send armed soldiers toward it, that could change very quickly." On the ground 50 feet from the Warbeast, Amy continued talking in her quiet, steady voice. She had learned from experience that scared animals needed time to understand that she wasn't a threat. "I bet you're tired," she said to the massive creature. "You look like you haven't been able to rest in a long time. Those metal things on? Your body probably hurt, don't they?" The Warbeast's multiple eyes continued to focus on Amy, but something in its posture had changed. Its tentacle appendages had stopped their constant writhing motion. Its massive claws were no longer scraping against the ground. "I had a dog once," Amy continued. "His name was Buster, and he got hurt in an accident. The veterinarian had to put metal pins in his leg to help it heal. Buster didn't understand why he was in pain. He just knew that everything hurt and he was angry about it." Dr. Martinez watched her instruments with growing amazement. "The creature's neural patterns are changing," she reported to Jake. "The interference from those control implants is still there, but the biological portions of its brain are responding to something." "Responding to what?" Jake asked. "I think it's responding to her voice," Linda replied. "Or maybe her emotional state. Some animals can sense human emotions through bioelectric fields and pheromones." Pete Foster stared at the screen showing his daughter sitting calmly in front of the most dangerous creature anyone had ever encountered. "She's always been able to do this," he said quietly. "But never with anything this big or this dangerous." "Do what, exactly?" Jake asked. "Amy has a way of showing animals that she understands their pain," Pete explained. "She doesn't try to fix it or make it go away. She just lets them know that someone understands what they're going through." Outside, Amy had begun talking about the colony and the people who live there. She told the Warbeast about her father's work, about the cats she fed, about her friends at school. She spoke as if she were having a normal conversation with a neighbor over a fence. "The people here are scared," she said. "But they're not bad. They're just confused because they don't understand what's happening. Most grown-ups have forgotten how to listen to animals. They try to solve problems by fighting instead of talking." The Warbeast slowly lowered its massive head closer to Amy's level. For the first time, she could see the individual eyes clearly. Each one was a different size and color, suggesting that the creature's natural biology had been artificially altered. "Those eyes weren't all yours originally, were they?" Amy asked gently. "Someone added extra ones to make you see better?" That must have been very painful." In the command center, Dr. Martinez was making a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about the situation. "Jake, I'm detecting some kind of feedback loop in the creature's control system," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Amy's bioelectric field is interfering with the implants." "Is that dangerous for her?" Pete asked immediately. "I don't think so," Linda replied. "But it seems to be giving the creature moments of clarity. Brief periods where its own mind can override the control signals." Jake studied the data on Linda's screen. "You're saying the creature is fighting against its own control system?" "Not fighting exactly," Linda corrected. "More like remembering. When Amy's presence interferes with the implants, the creature seems to remember what it was like before it was captured and modified." Amy had noticed the change too, though she understood it differently than the scientists. Watching from a distance, the Warbeast's eyes had lost some of their wild, pained look. For brief moments, she could see something that reminded her of the intelligence she had seen in dolphins and elephants at the zoo. "You were somebody before this happened to you, weren't you?" she said softly. "You had a family maybe, or friends? You probably had a home somewhere that you miss." The Warbeast made a sound that Amy had been hearing all night, but that the adults had missed. It was a low, mournful note that seemed to come from deep within its chest. Amy recognized it immediately. "You're crying," she said with understanding. "You're crying because you remember, and it hurts to remember." Pete Foster grabbed Jake's arm. "We have to get her out of there. If that thing is in emotional pain, it could become unpredictable." "Wait," Dr. Martinez said, studying her readings. "The creature's stress levels are still dropping. Amy isn't making it more dangerous. She's making it more stable." Amy slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out the piece of bread she had saved from breakfast. It was something she always did when approaching frightened animals, offer them food to show she meant no harm. "I don't know if you eat bread," she said, holding the small piece in her open palm. "But sharing food is how friends show they care about each other." The Warbeast stared at the tiny offering in Amy's hand. Several of its tentacle appendages moved toward her, but instead of grabbing or threatening, they simply hovered near her. Palm without touching. "You can't eat it, can you?" Amy realized. "Those control things probably changed how your body works." "I'm sorry, that must be really hard." Dr. Martinez was recording everything through the colony's remaining sensors. "The creature is showing classic signs of recognition and gratitude," she reported. "It understands that Amy is trying to help, even though it can't accept her offer." "How is that possible?" Jake asked. "It's supposed to be a mindless weapon." "It was never mindless," Linda replied grimly. "The Kethver took an intelligent creature and tortured it until it became a weapon. But Amy is somehow helping it remember what it was before." Amy gently put the piece of bread on the ground between herself and the Warbeast, then folded her hands in her lap again. "I'm going to stay here with you for a while," she told the creature. "You don't have to be alone with your pain. Sometimes that's all anyone really needs, just knowing that someone else understands." The Warbeast settled into a more comfortable position, lowering its massive body closer to the ground. Its many eyes continued to watch Amy, but now they seemed protective rather than threatening. In the distance, the Kethver forces had been monitoring the situation with growing alarm. War leader Thekval activated his communication system and contacted the human colony. "What technology are you using to interfere with our weapon?" his voice demanded through the translator. Jake answered the call, still watching Amy on the main screen. "We're not using any technology. It's just a child talking to your creature." "Impossible," Thekval replied. "No mere conversation could override our control systems." "Come see for yourself," Jake said, "but come without weapons." The child seems to be calming it down, and we don't want to change that. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Amy Foster continued her quiet conversation with the most dangerous creature in known space. And for the first time in perhaps years, the Warbeast began to remember what it felt like to have a friend. As the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across New Haven Colony, Amy Foster remained sitting peacefully beside the massive Warbeast. She had been there for several hours, talking quietly and sharing stories about her life. The creature had not moved from its protective position around her, and its multiple eyes had grown gentler as the day progressed. Dr. Linda Martinez had been monitoring the situation from the command center, recording data that would change how humans understood both alien technology and animal psychology. The readings showed that Amy's presence was creating a feedback loop that weakened the control implants with each passing hour. "The interference pattern is getting stronger," she reported to Jake Collins. "Whatever Amy is doing, it's helping the creature fight against its programming." Pete Foster had not left the command center since discovering his daughter outside. He watched the main screen constantly, torn between pride in Amy's courage and terror at the danger she was facing. "How long can this last?" he asked Dr. Martinez. "Those control devices have to reassert themselves eventually." "I don't know," Linda admitted. "We're in completely unknown territory here." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the perimeter sensors. A large group of HFY warriors was approaching the colony from the north, moving in full battle formation. "Incoming hostiles," reported Danny Brooks from his observation post. "Looks like at least 50 HFY. Soldiers heavily armed." Jake activated the colony's communication system. "This is Commander Collins. Any HFY forces approaching our position, please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came immediately. "Human Commander, this is War Leader HFY. We are here to reclaim our weapon and complete our mission. Your interference with our technology ends now." Jake looked at the screen showing Amy still sitting calmly beside the Warbeast. "War Leader, we are not interfering with anything. We have one child who is simply talking to your creature." "Impossible," HFY's voice crackled through the translator. "Our control systems cannot be defeated by conversation." "Then come and see for yourself," Jake replied. "But I warn you, any aggressive action toward the child or the creature could result in unpredictable consequences." Within an hour, War Leader HFY arrived at the colony's main gate with a small group of his elite warriors. The HFY commander was an impressive figure, standing nearly 9 feet tall with ceremonial scars covering his chitinous armor. His forearms carried weapons that could level buildings, but when he saw Amy Foster sitting peacefully beside the Warbeast, even the veteran warrior seemed confused. "This is your technology?" he asked Jake through his translator device. "One small human offspring?" "Amy has a natural ability to communicate with animals," Jake explained. "She's helping your creature remember what it was before you captured it." HFY's expression grew angry. "That thing is not an animal. It is a weapon designed for war and destruction. It has no memory of anything else." Dr. Martinez stepped forward with her tablet showing the bioscan data. "War Leader, with respect, your own readings must show that the creature's neural patterns have changed significantly since this morning." HFY consulted a device on his wrist, and his expression grew troubled. "The weapon's obedience indicators have dropped to unacceptable levels. Its aggression programming is being overridden because it's being allowed to remember its original nature," Linda explained. "Whatever this creature was before you modified it, that original personality is still there. Amy is just helping it surface." The HFY commander studied Amy through his compound eyes. "This is unacceptable. The weapon must be returned to full operational status." He pulled out a small control device that glowed with the same blue light as the implants in the Warbeast's body. "Stand away from the weapon, human child. I will restore its proper programming." Amy looked up at the towering alien warrior without fear. "His name isn't Weapon," she said calmly. "He had a real name before you heard him. Don't you remember what it was?" HFY paused, surprised by the directness of her question. "It has no name. It is a tool of war. Everything that thinks and feels has a name, Amy replied. Even if people try to take it away. The Warbeast had been watching the exchange with growing agitation. As Dekval activated his control device, the creature's body began to tense. The metal implants in its hide started glowing brighter, and a low rumble emerged from its chest. "Amy, move away from it," Pete called from the colony wall. "Something's happening." But Amy didn't move. She could see the pain returning to the creature's eyes as the control signals grew stronger. The Warbeast was fighting against the artificial commands, but the technology was winning. "Stop hurting him," Amy said to Vekval, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "Can't you see how much pain those things cause?" "Pain is irrelevant," Vekval replied, increasing the power of his control device. "Obedience is all that matters." The Warbeast began to rise from its protective position around Amy, its movements becoming jerky and unnatural as the control implants overrode its voluntary nervous system. The gentle intelligence that had been growing in its eyes was replaced by the wild, pained look that everyone had seen when it first arrived. Dr. Martinez watched her readings with growing alarm. "The creature's stress indicators are spiking. We're losing the progress Amy made." Amy stood up and placed her small hand against the Warbeast's scarred hide. She could feel the creature's internal struggle, its original mind fighting against the artificial programming that was being forced upon it. "You don't have to obey them," she said quietly to the Warbeast. "You can choose what you want to do." Vekval increased the control signal to maximum power. "The weapon will obey. It has no choice." The Warbeast roared in agony as the control implants sent waves of pain through its nervous system. Its massive body began to move toward the colony's defensive positions. Following the commands being transmitted by Vekval's device, Amy could see the creature's struggle in its eyes. Part of it wanted to follow the artificial commands and attack the humans. But another part, the part that remembered what it had been before its capture, was fighting to protect the small human who had shown it kindness. "Choose," Amy said firmly. Looking up at the creature's tortured face, "You can choose." The Warbeast stopped moving. Its multiple eyes focused on Amy's face as it fought against the control signals with every fiber of its being. The pain was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, it had something to fight for besides mere survival, war leader. Vekval watched in disbelief as his ultimate weapon refused to follow direct commands. "This is impossible. No creature can resist maximum control programming." Amy looked up at the massive creature that was enduring unimaginable pain simply to avoid hurting her and the other humans. She thought about all the animals she had helped over the years, and how the most important thing was always to let them make their own choices. Then she did something that would be remembered throughout human space for generations to come. Amy looked up at the 30-foot Warbeast, its body writhing in agony from the control implants, its mind torn between artificial programming and natural choice, and spoke in the same gentle voice she had used all day. "Sit." It wasn't a command, it wasn't a demand. It was simply a suggestion, offered with kindness and respect. The Warbeast looked down at Amy Foster, this small human who had shown it more compassion in one day than it had experienced in years of captivity. Despite the excruciating pain from the control devices, despite the alien technology trying to force it to attack, the creature made a choice. It sat down, the moment the Warbeast chose to obey Amy instead of the control devices. Something fundamental changed in its neural pathways. Dr. Martinez detected a cascade failure in the alien. Technology as the creature's own will override the artificial programming. "The control implants are shutting down," she reported in amazement. "The creature's natural neural patterns are taking control." Vekval stared at his control device in disbelief. "The weapon is free," he whispered. "It can no longer be controlled." Amy reached up and gently touched the Warbeast's massive face. "You don't have to be anyone's weapon anymore," she said softly. "You can just be yourself." The creature's eyes, now free from artificial programming, looked down at Amy with an intelligence and gratitude that made everyone present understand that they were witnessing something. Historic war leader Vekval lowered his control device. How? He asked quietly. How did one small human accomplish what our greatest scientist said was impossible? Amy looked at the towering alien commander with the same patience she had shown the Warbeast. I didn't make him do anything. I just asked nicely and let him choose. The crisis that had threatened to destroy New Haven Colony was over, ended not by superior weapons or advanced technology, but by a 10-year-old girl who understood that the most powerful force in the universe was the simple act of treating others with kindness and respect. As the sun set over the colony, Amy Foster sat beside her new friend, a 30-foot creature that had chosen friendship over fear and proved that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the most important words. The Warbeast had found its freedom, and humanity had found a new understanding of what true strength really meant.